Imagine stepping onto a sheet of ice, knowing the team across from you hasn't lost a meaningful game in, like, years.
Right. Yeah.
We aren't just talking about a solid roster. We're talking about players who are literally commissioned officers in the Soviet military, men who live in barracks and train together, 11 months out of the year.
And then there's you, right? A 20-year-old college kid who was stressing about midterms a few weeks ago.
Exactly. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are dissecting the anatomy of the ultimate underdog story. We're looking at a stack of sources detailing the 1980 miracle on ice at the Lake Placid Winter Olympics.
Yeah, and our mission here is to extract the core ingredients of this historical moment. We're bypassing the myths and looking at the actual mechanics of how this seemingly impossible victory was achieved.
And I want to say this directly to you, the listener. Whether you're staring down a massive, daunting project at work, navigating some formidable career hurdle, or honestly just love a story where the little guy figures out how to topple a giant, you need to pay attention.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a very real tactical blueprint for overcoming impossible odds hidden right in the details of this event.
So to understand the blueprint, we first have to understand the terrifying scale of the obstacle, right?
Yeah, we have to set the stage. It's February 1980. The Soviet Union's national hockey team is universally recognized as the best on the planet.
Completely unstoppable.
Unstoppable. They hadn't just won the previous 4 Olympic gold medals, they had utterly dismantled their competition.
I mean, just weeks before the Lake Placid Games, the Soviets played this very same American team in an exhibition match at Madison Square Garden.
Right, and they obliterated them, 10-3.
10-3. That exhibition game is such a crucial piece of the puzzle because it wasn't a hypothetical mismatch. The Americans had firsthand physical proof that they were completely outclassed.
Exactly. The sources emphasized that nobody, not the press, not the fans, not even the players' own families, gave the U.S. team a chance.
Wow, not even the families.
No. Walking into an arena knowing failure is the universal expectation. I mean, that has to do something to a person's mindset.
Great. How do you even tie your skates knowing you're walking into a buzzsaw?
What's fascinating here is the psychological weight of that specific matchup. When a team is as dominant as the Soviets were, they defeat you mentally before the game even begins.
Because of that aura of invincibility.
Precisely. Their years of domination created that aura. For an amateur walking into that arena, the human brain naturally tries to protect against perceived threats.
Great. Fight or flight.
Yeah, and when the threat is overwhelmingly superior, the instinct is often self-preservation. Keeping your head down, accepting the inevitable, and just trying not to be humiliated.
So the underdog subconsciously concedes the victory before the puck even drops.
Exactly. The expectation of failure becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
But the Americans didn't concede.
No, they didn't.
Because when you're fundamentally outmatched on paper, you need a radical strategy to change the math. Which brings us to the architect behind this entire upset, Coach Brooks.
Yeah. Brooks realized that conventional North American hockey strategies were completely useless against the Soviets. The traditional style at the time was dump and chase, right? Hitting hard and playing a gritty physical game.
But you can't hit what you can't catch.
Exactly. The Soviets played a beautiful, possession-heavy, weaving style of hockey. They just kept the puck.
So Brooks knew his college kids couldn't outmuscle them, and he had to completely rebuild how they played the game.
He did. He took these amateurs into the Adirondack Mountains for months of training and pushed them harder than they had ever been pushed.
Yeah, and there is a quote from the source material that really stopped me in my tracks here.
Oh, which one?
Brooks looked at his team and told them bluntly, "You don't have enough talent to win on talent alone."
Wow. A devastatingly honest assessment.
Okay, let's unpack this because I struggle with the logic here. If you're a coach facing the most intimidating opponent on earth, isn't your primary job to build your team up? Telling a group of 20-year-olds to their faces that they lack talent seems like a terrible motivational strategy.
Right. It sounds totally counterintuitive.
Wouldn't that completely destroy an amateur's confidence right when they need it most?
It sounds like, coaching malpractice on the surface.
Yeah.
But we have to look closer at the mechanism of what Brooks was doing.
Okay.
He wasn't destroying their confidence. He was destroying a very specific, very dangerous illusion. He was stripping away their reliance on individual ego.
Oh, I see. Because they were the stars of their own teams before this.
Exactly. Many of these kids were the star players on their respective college teams. They were used to relying on their personal speed or their individual shot to win games.
And Brooks was forcefully shutting down that mindset.
Yes, He was telling them, if you try to play an individual game of skill against the Soviet machine, you will be crushed because their skill is objectively superior.
But doesn't that backfire? You break them down, point out their inferiority, and risk them just checking out entirely.
Well, they would have if he hadn't immediately replaced that individual ego with collective survival.
Collective survival.
Right. Brooks realized that while his players were from rival schools like Boston University and the University of Minnesota, I mean, these were kids who literally brawled with each other on the ice months earlier.
Oh, wow, they hated each other.
Yeah, so they needed a common enemy to unite them. And Brooks made himself the enemy.
He became the villain they could all unite against.
Precisely. And he did it through the mechanism of pure physical exhaustion. There's a famous story in the sources from an exhibition game in Norway.
Right, the one where they tied.
Yeah, the American team played a terrible, lazy game and ended up tying a mediocre Norwegian team. After the game, while the fans were going home, Brooks ordered his team back onto the ice.
Just brutal.
He made them skate high-speed line drills, back and forth, over and over.
The notorious Urbies.
Yes, the Urbies. They skated until they were physically sick. The arena custodian eventually turned the lights off to close up the building, and Brooks kept them skating in the dark.
That is insane.
He pushed them past their physical limits to create a shared trauma.
Right.
Because when human beings are pushed to absolute punishing exhaustion, individual egos melt away.
You stop playing for personal glory and you start playing purely for the person gasping for air next to you.
Exactly. He replaced individual talent with radical teamwork.
But there was a physical benefit to those brutal drills too, wasn't there? It wasn't just psychological team building.
Oh, absolutely. The physical conditioning was the great equalizer. The Soviet players were older, seasoned professionals.
Right.
So Brooks banked on the fact that if he could condition his young college kids to survive the first two periods, they would have fresher legs in the third period.
So outlast them.
Yes. If they could keep the game close, the sheer cardiovascular endurance forged in those mountain practices would allow them to swarm the older Soviet players late in the game.
That brings us to game day. The collision of all this brutal preparation with reality. Let's walk through the climax, because the game itself wasn't a straightforward Cinderella story from the opening face-off.
No, not at all. The Soviets actually scored first, and they dominated possession early on. The Americans were hanging on by a thread, just trying to survive the onslaught.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The trajectory of the game shifts dramatically right at the end of the first period.
The buzzer beater.
Yes. The Americans are down 2-1. There are only a few seconds left on the clock. An American player takes a desperation shot from center ice.
Right, and the Soviet goalie, Vladislav Tretiak, who is widely considered the greatest goaltender in the world at the time, he makes the save.
But he leaves a rebound.
Exactly.
And an American player, Mark Johnson, slices through the defense and scores a sloppy goal with literally 1 second left on the clock.
That single second completely altered the psychology of both teams. The Soviet coach, Viktor Tikhonov, panicked.
Wait, he panicked?
Yeah, when the teams came out for the second period, Tikhonov had benched Tretiak. He pulled the greatest goalie in the world for a backup.
The sources mention that even the Soviet players were shocked by that move. It showed the Americans that the invincible machine had a glitch. They could bleed. They could panic.
It was a monumental strategic error by the Soviet coach, but it was forced by the relentless, chaotic pressure the Americans were applying.
Right, they weren't playing a clean, respectful game of hockey. They were swarming.
Fast forward to the third period. The Americans are down 3-2.
Which is exactly the scenario Brooks trained them for. They're heading into the final 20 minutes against a team that usually coasts to victory by this point.
But the Americans' young legs, fueled by those endless dark sprints in Norway, take over.
Yeah, they scored 2 goals in quick succession to take a 4-3 lead.
And then the final 10 minutes of the game become a masterclass in defensive survival.
I can only imagine the tension.
The Soviets, realizing they're actually losing, throw everything they have at the American net. But the conditioning held.
Because the older Soviet players were visibly exhausted.
Exactly. They were unable to execute their precise passing game against a swarm of energized college kids who simply refused to break.
So when the final horn sounded, securing that shocking 4-3 victory, the crowd in Lake Placid absolutely erupted. The source quotes the legendary television broadcast call by Al Michaels, counting down the final seconds.
Right.
Do you believe in miracles? Yes. It still gives people chills.
It is an audio snapshot of pure disbelief, but to fully grasp why that reaction was so explosive, we have to pull back the lens.
Yeah, let's do that. Because the source material repeatedly references the Cold War backdrop. It frames this event as something much bigger than sports.
It definitely was.
How does a hockey game between a bunch of 20-somethings become a defining cultural milestone?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the specific historical context of February 1980. The sources paint a picture of a deeply anxious American public.
Right, the United States was dealing with crushing inflation and long lines for gas.
Exactly. And the Iranian hostage crisis was dominating the nightly news. Plus, just weeks earlier, the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan, prompting the U.S. to announce a boycott of the upcoming Summer Olympics in Moscow.
So the mood of the country was incredibly bleak. There was a pervasive sense of national decline.
Yes. And when a public feels vulnerable and anxious about global affairs, they look for proxies to project those anxieties onto.
And a hockey rink is a perfectly contained metaphorical battlefield.
The sources make it clear that for the millions of people watching from their living rooms, this was not just a 4-3 score on a literal scoreboard. It was absorbed as a symbolic clash of superpowers.
Wow.
The victory of these amateurs over a state-sponsored, seemingly invincible opponent provided a tangible surge of national pride precisely when it was most desperately needed.
The public saw their own hopes for resilience validated by these college kids.
Exactly. The context of the era elevated a simple sporting upset into a mythological event.
The timing of the miracle was just as important as the miracle itself, but there's a fascinating detail in the sources that usually gets completely lost in the celebration and the confetti.
Oh, the hidden asterisk of the miracle on ice.
Yes. Beating the Soviets, slaying that giant, wasn't actually the end of the story. This legendary 4-3 game was a semifinal match.
Right.
They still had to play the national team from Finland 2 days later to actually win the gold medal.
It's crazy to think about.
I read that and thought, imagine staying up all night, studying for the hardest final exam of your college career. You walk in, completely nail it, and walk out feeling like you've conquered the world.
And then you realize you have another grueling 3-hour exam the very next morning to actually get your degree.
Exactly. How do you even care about playing Finland after you just changed the world?
That is a highly relatable way to look at the psychological challenge they faced. The emotional dump after beating the Soviets was catastrophic to their nervous systems.
Of course it was. Beating the USSR was the emotional peak of their entire lives.
It requires an almost superhuman level of mental fortitude to reset. And this is where Brooks's coaching once again proves its brilliance.
Because he knew the danger of a letdown.
He did. Going into the third period of that Finland game, the Americans were actually losing 2-1.
They were exhausted. The adrenaline was gone.
Yep. So Brooks walked into the locker room during the intermission, looked at his team, and told them that if they lost this game to Finland, they would take it to their graves.
Wow. He knew exactly how to snap them back to reality.
He forced them to compartmentalize their historic achievement and focus on the technical, unglamorous necessity of finishing the job.
And they did.
They scored 3 goals in the final period to beat Finland and win the gold.
Which really proved that his strategy of bonding through exhaustion didn't just create a team capable of a one-off emotional spike.
Exactly. It created a deeply disciplined unit that wouldn't settle for a merely symbolic victory. They demanded the tangible result.
They demanded the gold. And because they finished the job, the legacy of that moment is still incredibly tangible today.
Very true.
The sources emphasize that the village of Lake Placid, New York, actively preserves this history. You can physically visit the Brooks Arena. You can walk through the Olympic venues.
It is rare that a historical moment of this magnitude is so perfectly preserved in physical space.
Yeah, it bridges the gap between historical myth and physical reality. You can stand in the exact spot where the math broke down.
Exactly.
For anyone taking a trip through the Adirondacks, you can literally walk into that arena and feel the residual energy. It's a chance to show your kids a physical location, proving that the impossible is attainable.
Definitely.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've looked at the terrifying odds, the brutal preparation, the emotional climax, and the required follow-through. What is the actual blueprint here?
The blueprint is clear. Overcoming a massive obstacle in your own life doesn't start with blind optimism.
Right.
It requires an incredibly honest assessment of your own shortcomings.
You have to admit, just like Brooks told his players, that you might not have enough natural talent or resources to win on those factors alone.
You have to look at the giant you are facing and acknowledge the reality of the mismatch.
And once you accept that reality, you have to be willing to endure the grueling, unglamorous work required to close the gap.
Exactly. You change the math by changing how you play the game. You rely on relentless preparation, radical teamwork, and the sheer endurance to outlast your opponent when their talent starts to tire.
Before we wrap up, I know you always have a way of looking at these sources from a slightly different angle. What is your final thought on all of this?
Well, this raises an important question, something that lingers just beneath the surface of this entire story.
Okay.
We've established that the ultimate power of the underdog is the element of surprise, right? The psychological advantage of being entirely underestimated by a superior opponent.
Right, they didn't see them coming.
But if that is true, does achieving a miracle permanently destroy your ability to ever truly be an underdog again? Because once you prove to the world and to yourself that the impossible is actually possible, you are no longer the intramural kid facing the pros. You become the giant killer.
The blessing of the miracle becomes the burden of expectation.
Exactly. You lose the weapon of surprise. So the question becomes, how do you find that same desperate, world-shocking hunger the next time you step onto the ice when everyone is watching and expecting you to reverse gravity all over again?
That is something to really chew on. You survive the mismatch, but you inherit the pressure.
Thank you to everyone for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
Whether you are climbing a literal mountain or facing down a giant in your own career, keep seeking out the stories that make you believe in the impossible. Because while the larger mass usually crushes the smaller mass, and the math almost always makes sense, sometimes with enough endurance and the right strategy, the little guy changes the rules entirely. Keep looking for those moments. We will see you next time.